At our 27th anniversary dinner, the waiter slipped a folded note onto my plate. I thought it was from my husband, a small romantic gesture after nearly 3 decades together. Instead, the words shattered me. "Can't wait to see you Friday night at the Marriott. Love." That moment changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Michael smiled across the table as if nothing had happened, talking about sales at the dealership and a new shipment of SUVs. His voice was steady, confident, like the man everyone admired. I held the note beneath the tablecloth, its sharp edges biting into my palm. It was not a mistake. It was proof. Proof that the life I had sacrificed myself to build had been quietly burning behind my back. The Old Harbor Steakhouse glowed with soft candlelight, the kind of setting where anniversaries feel sacred. Couples laughed, servers moved with practiced grace, champagne glasses sparkled like jewels. To the world, we looked like another happy pair. To me, the scene was theater, every detail rehearsed, every smile forced. My body sat there, but my heart had already stepped outside into the cold Providence night. I stared at him as he cut into his steak, oblivious to the storm brewing inches away. How many nights had he hidden behind charm and half-truths? How many excuses had I swallowed whole, pretending not to taste the bitterness? I pressed my lips together, sealing in the anger, because rage is best served cold. And tonight, I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. The music playing from the piano drifted through the room. A love song for strangers. To me, it was nothing but noise, a cruel soundtrack to betrayal. My fork scraped against porcelain, every sound magnified, every detail engraved into memory. I had once dreamed of Paris for our 25th anniversary. Instead, I got Providence and a note from another woman. That was the sum of my marriage. I did not speak. I did not cry. I let silence spread around me like armor. Inside, something hardened, a sharp edge forming where there had once been devotion. For 27 years, I had played the loyal wife, the quiet supporter, the one who carried the weight when Michael faltered. Tonight, thanks to a note never meant for me, I discovered what loyalty truly costs and what vengeance requires. For nearly 3 decades, I had been Michael's anchor, the steady ground beneath his restless feet. When he lost his job at 35, I took on extra shifts at the library, shelving books until midnight just to keep our mortgage afloat. When his dealership struggled, it was my retirement savings that filled the gaps. I told myself this was what marriage meant, that love was proven by endurance. But endurance has a breaking point. I thought of the vacations never taken, the plans abandoned so Michael could pursue yet another business scheme. He promised me trips to Paris, to Venice, to the places I studied in my youth but never touched. Instead, I spent nights balancing bills at the kitchen table while he slept, convincing myself that stability was its own reward. Now I understood stability had been a mask hiding betrayal. A mask I had unknowingly helped him wear. Raising our daughter Emily had been my true joy, but even that role came at a cost. I carried the household while Michael charmed his clients, missing birthdays and school recitals. When Emily asked why he wasn't there, I lied for him. Daddy is working hard, I would say, swallowing my own disappointment. I built a wall of excuses around him, and brick by brick that wall became my prison. I remembered the nights I sat awake, waiting for him to come home, praying that the excuses were real. Perfume clung to his shirts, but I told myself it was from customers. Credit card charges appeared in places I'd never visited, and I convinced myself it was business. Love had made me blind, but betrayal made me see with brutal clarity. The note was not an accident. It was confirmation of years stolen from me. Even now, sitting in that steakhouse, I looked at Michael and thought of all the ways I had protected him from his own failures. He had gambled with money, lied about debts, leaned on me as though my devotion was infinite. I had been his safety net, his shield, his silent accomplice. But a shield can break and a net can snap. The cost of carrying him was written in lines on my face, and I refused to pay it any longer. This story is not just about betrayal. It is about the years that lead to it, the sacrifices buried in silence, the dreams exchanged for someone else's comfort. And if you think you know how this ends, you don't. Stay with me until the last word, because the moment of vengeance is coming. And when it does, it will be colder and sharper than anything Michael ever imagined. The night after our anniversary dinner, I did not sleep. I lay awake in the dark, the note hidden in my nightstand drawer, its words searing through my mind. By morning, curiosity mixed with dread. I searched for answers where secrets always hide in plain sight. My hands trembled as I opened Michael's social media, a place I had avoided because I never wanted to see what he was truly proud of. There it was, clear as day. Photos tagged at the Marriott downtown, not business meetings as he had claimed, but dinners with Rebecca. In one picture she leaned across the table, her hand resting on his, her smile bright and confident. In another, champagne glasses clinked beneath golden chandeliers. The captions were harmless enough to the world, but to me they were confessions. Each like, each comment was a nail driven into the coffin of my marriage. I stared at the images until my eyes burned, unable to decide which hurt more, the deceit itself, or the brazen confidence with which he lived it. He had not even bothered to hide. The same man who told me he valued loyalty, who looked me in the eye every morning, had been building a parallel life without hesitation. Betrayal in silence is cruel, but betrayal in public is humiliation sharpened to a blade. When Emily called that afternoon, her voice was cheerful. She asked if we had enjoyed our dinner. I lied again, telling her it was wonderful. As she spoke about her work in Boston, my gaze fell once more on Rebecca's face in those photographs. Emily's voice carried hope, innocence, the belief that her parents' marriage was strong. I could not break her illusion yet, though part of me longed to expose her father in the harshest light. Later that evening, Michael came home, loosening his tie, humming as though the world were unshaken. He kissed my cheek absently, and I caught the faint trace of Rebecca's perfume. I asked him how his day had been, and he answered with ease. "Just busy, Susan. You know how it is." My silence was louder than any accusation. He sat across from me, unaware that I now carried his secrets heavier than he ever carried our marriage. The humiliation was not only that he cheated, but that he made me invisible. In public, he laughed with her while I lived in shadows. In private, he expected me to continue as caretaker, provider, protector. He believed I would remain blind. But humiliation can turn into something else if held long enough. It hardens. It sharpens. And in that silence, I began preparing not to be his victim, but his reckoning. Remember to share this story if you've ever witnessed betrayal hidden in plain sight, because sometimes the truth demands to be spoken aloud. At night, the silence in our house grew heavier than walls could bear. Michael's breathing beside me was steady, untroubled, the rhythm of a man who slept easily while I lay awake counting every betrayal. I listened to the clock tick, each second louder than the last, each minute another reminder that I was trapped in a marriage that had become a prison. Silence was no longer peace, it was punishment. During the day, I moved through rooms like a ghost. The living room still smelled faintly of the flowers Michael had bought me weeks earlier, but even their fragrance felt like a lie. I prepared meals neither of us truly tasted, washed dishes that clattered louder than they should, folded laundry with hands that trembled. The weight of what I knew pressed against me, but I carried it in silence because words seemed too fragile for the truth. I tried to write in my journal, but sentences broke apart halfway through. My pen left angry scratches across the page as I tried to untangle thoughts that twisted into knots. Sometimes I whispered to myself, testing the words I could never say to him. You betrayed me. You made me invisible. You threw away decades of my life. But the walls absorbed those confessions, leaving me lonelier than before. Michael noticed nothing, or pretended not to. He asked if I was tired, if something was wrong, and I answered with practiced calm. I'm fine, Michael. Just a little tired. Lies slid off my tongue as easily as his. When he reached for my hand, I let him, though my body stiffened at the touch. I wondered how many nights Rebecca had felt that same hand resting on hers, and rage burned where love used to live. There were moments when grief consumed me. Tears welled unexpectedly while I folded towels, while I watched the evening news, while I stood staring out at the bare branches in the yard. I cried not only for his betrayal, but for the years I had lost to silence, for the woman I once dreamed of being but never became. Pain carved into me like a sculptor, reshaping me into someone harder, colder, someone he would no longer recognize. In that silence, however, something shifted. Grief turned to fury, and fury became resolve. The quiet that once suffocated me began to sharpen into clarity. Michael thought I would remain voiceless, that my silence meant surrender. That silence can be the sharpest weapon. It lingers, it builds, and when it finally breaks, it cuts deeper than any scream. If you've ever felt the weight of silence after betrayal, let me know. Your story matters as much as mine. One evening, as I sat in the dim glow of the kitchen, I realized something had shifted inside me. The tears had dried. The trembling had stopped. What remained was sharp and steady, like steel forged in fire. I read the note again, its edges worn from being held too tightly. Can't wait to see you Friday night at the Marriott. Love. Ah, those words were no longer wounds. They were fuel. I looked around the house and saw every sacrifice etched into its walls. The mortgage I had paid, the furniture I had chosen, the meals I had prepared. This was my life, my contribution, my loyalty made visible. And yet, Michael had treated it as disposable. I understood now that I had not lost my voice. He had simply mistaken my silence for weakness. The awakening was not sudden, but once it came, it was irreversible. The next time he told me he would be home late, I listened with new ears. His excuses no longer pierced me, they amused me. I nodded and smiled. The same quiet wife he thought he knew. But inside my mind burned with calculations. How long had he taken advantage of my devotion? How many years had he squandered my sacrifices? The answers no longer mattered. What mattered was that I would no longer be his shield. I began watching him differently, studying his movements, his words, the false charm he carried like armor. At dinner, I asked casual questions, observing the flicker in his eyes when he lied. I collected these details not as evidence, but as reminders. Every pause, every hesitation was a thread in the rope he had tied around himself. For years, I had pulled him to safety. Now I would let him hang. One night he walked into the living room and asked if I was upset. I looked at him calmly and said, "No, Michael, I'm not upset." My voice surprised me. It was even, detached, almost cold. He smiled, reassured, and returned to his routine. He never noticed that the woman in front of him had changed. That love had hardened into something merciless. His blindness was my weapon. His arrogance was my ally. Vengeance does not arrive in screams. It arrives in stillness, in the quiet decision that you will no longer bend. That night, I folded the note neatly and slipped it back into the drawer. It was no longer a secret burning in the dark. It was a contract I had signed with myself. From now on, I would not save him. From now on, I would let him feel the weight of every sin. If you believe betrayal deserves its answer, show your strength. Subscribe for the rest of this story. The confrontation came not with thunder, but with quiet inevitability. Michael stumbled through the door one Friday night, the same night named in Rebecca's note. His shirt was rumpled, his hair disheveled, his cologne a mixture of hotel soap and something sweeter. I sat in the living room, the lamp casting a low amber light, the note folded neatly on the coffee table. He paused when he saw me, his smile faltering. He asked why I was awake, his tone casual, forced. I told him simply, "I was waiting for you." The words fell heavy into the silence, and he shifted uneasily, his keys rattling in his hand. I could have screamed, demanded, accused. Instead, I let silence widen between us until it became unbearable. Then I slid the note across the table, my eyes fixed on his. He read it and paled. For a moment he tried to recover. "Susan, it's not what you think." "She means nothing." I listened, my face still, my body calm. Lies dripped from his mouth with the same ease they had for years, but they no longer cut me. They confirmed what I already knew, that the man before me valued deception more than loyalty. I let him speak because his desperation was more satisfying than any outburst of mine. Finally, I interrupted. I said, "Michael, I will not raise my voice. I will not cry. But from tonight forward, I will not save you any more." My voice was steady, detached, as though I was speaking to a stranger. He blinked, startled by the lack of rage, unsettled by the composure. Anger he could handle. Silence, however, was a weapon he could not deflect. He sat down heavily, his shoulders slumped, his mask slipping. For the first time in years he seemed small, diminished. He begged then, his words tumbling out promises, excuses, appeals to memory. I listened without reaction, the years of my sacrifice replaying in my mind. Every dollar spent, every dream abandoned, every lie swallowed had brought us here. I felt no pity, only a deep, cold satisfaction that he finally understood the shift in power. That night marked the end of the marriage he thought he controlled. He believed confrontation would end in tears, maybe forgiveness, maybe another cycle of excuses. Instead, he met a silence sharper than knives, a woman who would no longer be his shield. And in that silence I tasted the first true freedom I had known in years. If this moment strikes you, leave a comment with one word: freedom. The days that followed were unlike any I had known in our marriage. Michael unraveled before my eyes, not in a dramatic explosion, but in a steady, pathetic decline. He called me from work during lunch breaks, his voice strained and uncertain, asking what I was doing, asking if I was angry. I gave him nothing more than brief answers. My detachment frightened him more than any fury could have. At night, he lingered near me, restless, pacing the bedroom, inventing excuses to speak. He told me he was stressed, that the dealership was suffering, that Rebecca was just a distraction. He swore she meant nothing, swore that I was the one he loved. I looked at him and said quietly, "Love does not treat people as disposable." His eyes fell then, because even he knew those words were the truth he could not escape. He began to lose control of himself. Small things exposed the cracks, the way his hands shook as he poured coffee, the way his voice broke when Emily called and asked if everything was fine. He lied to her, just as he always lied, but this time his lies were clumsy. He was unraveling, tangled in the web he had spun, and I no longer reached to steady him. Watching him stumble was a justice I had waited years to taste. The more he begged, the more power I felt returning to me. I had spent decades cushioning his falls, rewriting his failures as bad luck, patching holes in a sinking ship. Now I stood still, arms folded, and let him sink. He asked me one evening if I could forgive him, if we could rebuild. I answered with calm precision, "Forgiveness is not a gift I owe you." His silence afterward was heavier than stone. He started avoiding mirrors, as if he could not stand to face himself. He left for work earlier, came home later, his exhaustion etched deep into his face. But I no longer cared for the details of his schedule. For the first time in our lives, the weight of his choices rested solely on him. And in that shift, I discovered what it meant to be free, not from marriage, but from servitude disguised as love. His collapse was not loud, but it was undeniable. The confident salesman, the man who once charmed a room, had become a hollow figure haunted by my silence. I had finally inverted the balance. The tremor that had lived in my body for years now lived in his. If you have ever watched someone face the ruins of their own lies, like this video, it proves betrayal eventually destroys itself. I began to calculate the true cost of my devotion, the numbers and memories colliding in my mind. There were the nights I worked double shifts at the library when the mortgage threatened to drown us. The $15,000 I withdrew from my retirement fund to cover his debts, telling myself it was temporary. Temporary became permanent, and every sacrifice I made bought him more time to betray me. I remembered the trips never taken, the promises that dissolved into air. Our 25th anniversary was supposed to be Paris, the trip I had dreamed of since girlhood. Instead, I stood in our kitchen cooking pasta, while Michael claimed he couldn't leave work. He spent that night with someone else, I realized later, while I consoled myself with wine and excuses. Those years were currency, and I had spent them all on a man unworthy of credit. Even small details haunted me. The dresses I never bought so that he could pay for new suits. The vacations cancelled because his dealership needed more capital. The countless birthdays and anniversaries where my gifts were modest, but his pleasures extravagant. I had traded away fragments of myself, convincing my heart that patience and love were noble. But nobility without respect is nothing but slavery wearing a kind mask. When Emily was younger, I shielded her from his chaos, taking on the weight of his failures so she would not see them. I lied for him, crafted stories to preserve the image of a father she could admire. But every lie corroded something inside me, and the corrosion spread until I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. What I gave to protect her became the ground he used to bury me. The total was not just financial, though the money lost could have secured my peace in retirement. It was emotional, physical, spiritual. Every sleepless night, every tear shed in silence, every hope abandoned became part of the ledger. When I looked back, the sum of my sacrifices could have built a new life, one filled with art, travel, and dignity. Instead, I handed them to Michael, and he turned them into ashes. Now I no longer grieve those years. I documented them in my heart like evidence at a trial. He would never repay me, but he would face the truth. And the truth was simple. The cost of my loyalty was his downfall. If you've ever added up the sacrifices that someone took for granted, leave a comment with the number, because every silent sacrifice deserves to be counted. The night I finally stopped trembling, I knew the balance of our lives had shifted forever. For years, Michael had fed off my silence, mistaking it for surrender, for devotion. Now, when he looked at me, he saw not the loyal wife but a stranger whose gaze no longer pleaded. That change unsettled him more than any confrontation ever could. Power had returned to me, and it tasted cold and clean. He tried one last time to soften my resolve. Sitting across from me at the kitchen table, he asked if I still loved him. His voice cracked, a sound I had never heard from him before. I answered with calm precision. I loved who I thought you were, Michael. That man is gone. His eyes watered, but I felt nothing. Love cannot survive on ashes, and ashes are all he left me. For weeks afterward, I carried myself differently. My steps were lighter, my words more certain. I no longer monitored his lies, because they no longer mattered. I no longer shielded Emily from his failures, because truth was the gift she deserved. Freedom came not in grand gestures, but in small ones. Drinking coffee without dread, walking through the house without fear, sleeping without waiting for a door to open. Every act was a quiet rebellion. Michael withered under that freedom. His jokes fell flat. His charm dissolved. His confidence abandoned him. He grew smaller, like a man fading from his own stage. Each day I felt stronger, not because I wanted revenge in the form of ruin, but because his ruin had already begun the moment I stopped protecting him. The silence that once suffocated me had become the air in which I thrived. I stood one evening by the window, the city lights glowing in the distance, and thought about the woman I had been. She had given too much, believed too much, waited too long. That woman was gone, and in her place stood someone sharper, someone unwilling to beg for scraps of affection. I whispered to myself, almost smiling, I survived you, Michael. And surviving you is the sweetest revenge of all. This is not just my story. It belongs to anyone who has carried betrayal in silence, only to find strength in the ruins. If you have listened until the end, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is not shouting, not breaking, not fighting. It is standing tall in silence while the guilty collapse beneath the weight of their own lies.